The rest of the evening, we'll have, it's going to be a conversation between me and our guest, but I hope very much a conversation with everyone else. So please do use the chat to post questions and I'll read them out to our guest. Our guest is Isabelle Roughol, who is the founder, hoster, and producer of Borderline, a podcast for global citizens. She's also building One Lane Bridge, which is a storytelling studio and a creative home for Borderline. And she defines herself as a media artisan, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. Before that, she was editorial director and a senior editor at large at LinkedIn, where she helped build the global editorial team. And before that, she was a journalist at Le Figaro. I was thinking earlier when I was chatting to Isabelle about how we're going to frame the conversation tonight, that Isabelle really embodies well, sort of like a new version of what to me is hackers, the body of hackers, basically. Mainly because, you know, when we started, I think hackers, the idea was thinking of the journalists who can code, who can do some infographic. But now it's really about much more. It's everything that happens at the intersection between product, technology, business, editorial. And Isabelle really, as a media artisan, embodies all of this. Isa, welcome, and we're very happy to have you here tonight.
Thank you very much. It's great to be back among friends.
Can you start telling us about your career?
Yeah, boy, I feel like I've already had like 4 different ones in you know, a bit over a decade. I trained as a journalist in the US, the Missouri School of Journalism. So I'm French, but my career's been mainly English language. From there, I kind of originally was thinking foreign reporting. So I worked in Cambodia as a newspaper reporter. Then I went back to France, worked with Le Figaro and the New York Times on the foreign desk and on a collaboration between the 2 newsrooms. That ended the way that many newspaper gigs end, which was, you know, was a bunch of temp contracts, and that eventually could not be renewed, which, you know, I think is a pretty common experience when you're in newspapers in the 2010s. And yeah, after a few months, kind of lucked into this role at LinkedIn, which at the time had like 4 editors. It was really tiny, and I was hired to start a French language pilot, which we ended up actually shuttering the next year. But I quickly started working on a bunch of other things, and I stayed at LinkedIn for 7 years, and I got to be part of its growth, from, you know, a tiny team of 4 to about 70 editors around the world.
And then you left.
And then I left.
And you started Borderline.
Yeah, I mean, the 2 are different. Like, there's about 6 months between the 2 decisions, so they're not necessarily connected. But
tell us about Borderline.
So Borderline is a podcast, a newsletter, and a community for defiant global citizens. So the idea is that I think there are a lot of people like me, like you, in fact, who have, you know, either are immigrants or have lived in a bunch of different countries, or just have a life that isn't confined by one national community and it straddles borders. And just, I haven't found a lot of media that addresses this, and it's a very particular kind of identity and kind of life experience. And I find that most of the people that I end up socializing with kind of have a similar experience, because it's just something that we can relate. And yeah, I just wasn't hearing those stories. So, you know, in 2020, when you don't hear the stories you want to see, you just go in and just put them out in the world yourself. So that's kind of what I started doing.
And that's what prompted you to describe yourself as a media artisan, someone who actually goes out and do it herself and owns the full thing, the brand, the production. And so I really like the concept of the media artisan. Can you tell us more of what you mean with it?
Yeah, so the idea is that there's been a lot of talk in the industry about all these people who go on Substack or whatever, kind of start their own thing, and it's been called a passion economy or the creator economy. And I was like, yeah, but people who work in traditional newsrooms, they're also passionate about what they do, and they're also creative. So it just didn't feel like it really encapsulated why this is different. And why I feel it's different is that there's really that sense of ownership, of independence. So kind of like a freelancer, you're working independently, but also you kind of own your platform. You own your audience. I mean, as much as you can own people, that's an awful word, but you know what I mean. And you're, kind of like a craftsman and artisan. You're a small business of one. I think in journalism, we like to think that we're very unique, but like, honestly, I think we have a lot to learn from other small businesses because it's quite similar. And so the idea is that you're able to reach your audience directly. You're very close to your work and you're very close to your community in a way that you can't necessarily be when you're part of a larger corporation, which is what a lot of media organizations have become.
And of course, right now there are a lot of software tools, relatively easy to buy equipment to get started. But in reality, in your experience, what did it take to start a podcast? Like, what kind of skills do you feel you had to have, and what things can be learned?
So I think you can learn anything. And I think especially journalists, like you're used to thinking of your feet, and if you can learn a new beat, you can learn new skills. It's the same principle. And there's so much that's available online right now. I definitely think like a movement like what we're seeing right now wouldn't have been possible 10 years ago. I think even 5 years ago would have been more difficult, because you just have all these tools that are available that are largely free, in that you can learn. My philosophy is learn as you go. So kind of the second I had the idea, I launched it, even though I absolutely was not ready. And the first few episodes are, and I listened back and I cringe and the audio was wrong. But you learn by doing, and you just launch and you just go. So that's kind of the production and the technical and the journalism skills. But then you also have business skills, which I definitely got a lot from my experience at LinkedIn, where you had editorial independence, but you had, as an editor, you had a head for the business in a way that often you don't in traditional newsrooms. So I learned to think about audience first, and who are you building this for? What's your product? What's your strategy? What's your business model? All of these things you have to think about, unless you're just interested in like doing fun journalism and never making a living from it, which is fine. But if you're trying to build a business, you kind of have to have those skills in mind as well.
And that's something I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned is a trend now. There is an article every so often about a new journalist with a big following leaving its publication, his or her publication, going solo. And in a way, because of all of these tools and how easy it is to just jump in and start doing it, it kind of seems, I don't want to say easy, but at least straightforward. And I'm all for trying out new things and starting a new project and entrepreneurship, but is it that easy as all of these trends of big journalists leaving make it sound? What does it entail really to do this if that's your living?
Yeah, it's definitely not easy. I would say it's available. So there isn't like that barrier to entry that there would have been to starting a business, a decade ago or longer ago. So there is no barrier to entry. I think the barrier to success, however, is super high. So, I wouldn't, I'm always like very happy for people to do this and like come in, the water's warm and the community is very helpful and all of that. But I do also want people to be realistic. So for me, I went on sabbatical and I was planning on not making any money this year. And then this idea came up like 6 months later. And it's still not making any or much money. I mean, it's like literally pocket change. It's actually costing me money because the cost of software is higher than what I'm making from the handful of people supporting me on Patreon right now. So that's the reality. And you also have to be like Jack or Jill of all trades. Like you have to do the journalism, the production. And by the way, if you're doing a podcast like me, which is a bit crazy, like unless you love podcasts, like start with a newsletter because it's much lower barrier of entry in terms of technical skills and just the time it takes to edit. But even if you're just doing a newsletter, like you have to be doing the reporting and the writing. And by the way, you're editing yourself as well, which is nerve-wracking. But then you also have to think about audience development, and you're your own social media editor. And by the way, like I have a Canva subscription because I'm making my own graphics. And so it's just, you're doing everything, which is what I love about it, because you're never bored, because you just have you get to flex so many different muscles and exercise so many different skills. And I love art as much as I love business. So I like that I'm able to do both, but it's a lot, and it's definitely not, especially if you're hoping to make it a sustainable business, like it's not a side gig, it's more than a full-time job.
We already have a question from Katie Carroll. What's the best way to develop your business skills business had before going down this sort of path? So basically what you were saying just now.
Yeah, and Katie would know this because she worked with me at LinkedIn. For me, what's really helped is actually having had this experience within a more established company where I got to learn first. So I got tons of entrepreneurial skill from my time at LinkedIn. Like Katie and I actually together built the daily newsletter at LinkedIn. So I spent years writing a daily newsletters and working on the product and thinking about how we get this to an audience. And by the way, it was a slog, even with a huge product team and software engineers and a network of 500 million people, you know? So that was hard enough, but at least I got the skills, and I got to learn from people who had done this, people who were smarter than me, and just, you know, so I tried freelancing like 10 years ago, you know, before I joined LinkedIn. I had no idea what I was doing. I wasn't thinking about it as a business. And now that I have all those business skills and those tech skills and those product skills, I come at it from a completely different experience. So definitely recommend, if you're earlier on in your career, like you got to learn, like find people who will teach you. Is the most important thing that you should be looking for in any professional opportunity, especially early on, but I think throughout your life and your career.
You kind of touched on this before, but if you had to, you know, if there was someone in our audience who's thinking about doing this and they are there but not quite sure if they are ready, what would you say do, either to make the jump and leave a more stable job to start something on their own, or starting something on the side, which, as we know, it still takes a lot of energy and time? What would you think, like one piece of advice is, like, how do you know when you're ready? How do you know when it's the right time? And how do you know if, you know, you mentioned that a newsletter is of less intensity as a starting point, but how do you learn what is the right channel? Is it podcast for everyone? Is it newsletters for everyone? How do you know?
So there are two questions here. Like, how you know what's the right product? It's always testing and iterating. So, you know, in tech, we talk about MVP, minimum viable product. So you really want to just put something out there and see who responds. Like, who's the community? Like, I would always start with audience. Like, who's the community that you're going after that would respond to this? And then just put a very simple product out there. You know, it can be as simple as an article or whatever, to see if they bite. So for instance, with Borderline, it actually started with a column that I wrote like 2 years ago. And I wrote about, you know, global citizens and people, there was this movement around the world of nationalism and borders shutting down. And I just kind of wrote this like call to arms of resistance of people who were global citizens and just did not like this trend. And that column like blew up. And what was interesting was the comments, because in the comments I had tons of people being like, oh, I lived in this country and that country and that country, or I used to be an exchange student, or I'm an immigrant too, and no one speaks to us. And I had like dozens and hundreds of comments on that column. And all those people, when I launched Borderline, I like emailed all of them and was like, hey, by the way, I just launched this thing that I think is going to work for you. So like just making sure that someone bites with a very simple product. And then you're constantly refining what you're doing. Like, it's never over. As whether it's the right time for you, that's so individual. It's really hard to answer. Reach out to me. I love having these conversations with people, so don't hesitate. Just be clear about what you want, what your runway is. Like, you have to have a financial runway. Just be very realistic. There's only so much that you can do as a side gig. You can do, I do some consulting so that I can actually, still pay rent. But honestly, it's so frustrating because it distracts you from building your business. And so I'm actually like actively trying not to get clients now. But just, be clear with yourself about what your runway is, like what your deadline is. Like at one point you're going to be like, hey, like, sorry, but I got to get a job again. Being realistic, I think, just helps you weather the tough times as well.
I love this advice. I agree. We have a question from Laura Oliver. Wishing you so much success with Borderline. Knowing what you know now, is there anything you would do differently with your podcast or startup? As you mentioned, there has been a boom in independent podcasts and newsletters this year. But what characteristic or strategies do you expect offer the best chance of success or longevity?
Yeah, two excellent questions. I would do absolutely everything differently. But if I had, I wouldn't have learned what I've learned, which now makes me think I would do it differently. So, you can always look back and think, but that's how you learn. It's by making the mistakes. So for instance, very concretely, I launched my podcast on a weekly schedule, which is absolutely bonkers when you're producing, editing. Like finding guests is super hard, and scheduling interviews, and like it's not like I have an assistant. Like there's a reason that like people in broadcasts have gigantic teams just to make one show. And so weekly schedule was dumb. So I'm going to be probably moving in the next season to a bi-weekly schedule so I don't drive myself insane. The newsletter also has kind of changed and is still changing. I think in terms of success and longevity, so apparently with podcasts, like I'm already probably in the top 5% of longest running podcasts. I'm publishing my 15th episode tomorrow. And most podcasts have like 3. There's a drop off at 3 and there's another drop off at 7. I don't know, it's something about prime numbers. I don't know. But I'm at 15. So I think you need to find a topic that you're really deeply interested in and that is really true to who you are. Don't figure this out by committee. Don't like see, where is there a niche in a market that isn't filled that I could go after? Like it has to be something that is true to you, because you're going to have to be giving this like every waking minute of your life for a while. And so if you're not interested, your audience is going to notice and you're going to burn out very quickly. So yeah, I think that's the key, making sure that it matters to you.
Well, you just mentioned what was going to be my next question. It's a lot to do all on your own.
Yeah.
And even if on one sense you're getting a lot of freedom by being your own boss, I think there is a sort of like a false idea when you're on your own boss, you can give yourself a lot of holidays, which is usually quite the contrary. How do you avoid burnout? How do you avoid that it becomes too much? So how do you make sure that you still keep it to a manageable level?
Yeah, I'm not there yet because it hasn't been all that long. But I think burnout comes much quicker. I mean, burnout is yeah, fatigue and working nonstop, but it's also, it comes mostly when you no longer find meaning in the work. And when you're just feeling like it's just a slog and it doesn't match your values or your identity. So when you're doing your own thing, you don't have that problem. And I think that's why, you know, entrepreneurs and small businesses just have that much more lasting power before burnout. That said, ideally, you don't want to get to burnout. And I've been there before and it's no fun. So I think the beauty of, you know, this artisan model is that you're independent and you own everything and you own your own schedule. You know, it's up to you how it works. So for me, it's been really about just listening to myself and to my body a lot more. So I have no problem working through the weekend. I work late at night because that's when I'm actually creative. And I work early in the morning because that's when I'm also creative. But in the middle of the day, I'm just kind of useless and I'm going around cleaning the flat and I take long walks. And you know, it works for me because there is no boss telling me to do anything differently. So that's kind of how you avoid burnout, is having that freedom. And you know, I've gone camping on a Wednesday just because, you know, I just needed fresh air, and I can work kind of like 10 days. And then there's a morning that I wake up and it's just like, it's too much. I gotta do something else. I take that day off.
That's very good advice. We have another question from Jill. Thanks for this super useful chat. What are the best ways to monetize a podcast or a newsletter, would you say? Or is that the end game? Or is it instead to build a community?
It's both. It goes together. Monetizing is super hard. And, you know, I haven't lock that down by any means. The conversion rates, like everyone, I talk with a lot of people who do similar kind of, you know, small business media. The conversion rates are actually really low. So, you know, you have to, you know, there was a lot of talk about Casey Newton and his, you know, 20,000 email list, which he conveniently took from The Verge, I think, as his exit package. But he was talking about 10% conversion rates. Like, more power to him if he converts 10%. That's really high. So first you have to grow your audience a lot, so that even if only like 1 to 2% or 5% convert, you get money. The model that I personally like is membership, because it's really about building a community, and people give because they appreciate your work and they want you to do more of it. I try to do, and I will be doing more of that, like extra content and special content for people who patronize. So there's Patreon, or there's the paid Substack option. But honestly, like if people give you $5 or $8 a month, or pounds, like it's about the cost of a Netflix subscription, and they're never going to get as much as a Netflix subscription. So it's, people aren't looking at the price value, right? Because it's nothing like a New York Times or a Netflix subscription in terms of amount of content. It's really just about, they connect with your voice and they want to support that. I'm very transparent with my my audience. Like I just launched a membership drive. I was literally like, hey guys, like this is how much it costs me just to put the podcast out every month, let alone like paying myself. Just this is what it costs me to put it out every month. Like, please help me. And so when you build a community, then that monetizes. I think it's in that order rather than the other way around.
There is a related question from Tom Trinad. I really like the artisan framing. Curious about how, or if you're thinking about growth, or deliberately not thinking about growth to retain that artisanal character, which is sort of related to what you were just saying.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think, I mean, you have to think about growth, because if you don't monetize, like it's going to die. So, you know, that is a reality. Like you're still running a business. So the way I think about it is I'm not interested in growth hacking. So I'm not going to pay for Facebook ads or things like that. Like first, like I said, I can't afford it, but even so, like I'm not interested in growth hacking. I'm not interested in getting to like thousands and thousands. I'm interested in quality growth. So, you know, what are some podcasts and some newsletters that I can partner with who are addressing a similar community? What are the people, like the best growth comes from your audience, and when they refer to friends and, you know, tweet about this great podcast that they just heard, that's the best kind of growth. So you need the growth because you need the monetization. Ideally, you would be able to convert a lot more people, also not have them churn, which is a whole other thing, but like churn is the enemy. But you do need to think about growth. Sorry.
I wanted to, I'm conscious we are running a bit out of time. So if there is any more question to person in the chat, there's one just now. Anna Bird, hi, thank you for sharing your experience. Well, so many questions, but a practical one. How do you edit yourself? Do you have a method?
I try to not publish when I'm done. Like I try to sleep on it and like read it the next morning without the without having it burn in my eyes, because you can't really see it once you but the reality is that like you're always running after the clock, so that's actually really hard to do. I'm pretty paranoid about my facts because I don't have an editor. I'm like really scared of saying something wrong, so I do, you know, triple check my facts. Because it's a more casual kind of medium when you're doing a newsletter, for instance, than if you were doing, you know, an article in The Guardian. I'm not so much worried about AP style and like first reference and second reference and all the things that if I was copy editing, I would like be a jerk about. There are a few techniques, like if you're really just worried about like spelling and things, edit backwards, like go from the last word, and because that way you're not reading for meaning, you're just literally looking at the words. I know some people who actually hire an external freelance editor. That's people who've been able to monetize a bit more. So maybe I'll get there at some point.
Thank you so much, Isa. I'm sure there are going to be more questions, and I'm sure we'll post them on Twitter or reach out to you.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer them. You know, Twitter, LinkedIn, borderlinepod.com has all the ways to reach me.
Fantastic. And so should we wait for an episode tomorrow?
Yeah, actually, this is so funny because the next person to come on Hacks Hackers is also my guest, Marcella. So our episode is out on Patreon now for members, and it'll come out to the public tomorrow.
Fantastic. What a great way to end. I promise that wasn't done.
Not planned at all, no.
Because of our fantastic community. Thanks very much, Isa, for talking to us.
Thank you so much.
And best of luck with everything.
Thank you.